Mic check 1 2, testing 1 2.
Legislature's back in session. Thank you very much for trying to get here as quickly as possible. I have three senators that have indicated their desire to be heard on Bill 50. Senator Louise, Senator Estevez, and Vice Speaker. So why don't we start with Senator Louise Borja-Muñoz. Guys.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for making me speak first after lunch. I'll try not to make it too long. I just want to, before I acknowledge whether I support or not support this bill, I do want to commend the author because just in the last month I realized what a controversial subject this is, because even no matter where I'm at, I get people stopping me all the time, talking to me about their own personal values, how they feel about it. And so it got me thinking, you know, could it be a personal issue, how you feel about gambling? And it really is. I don't think anybody really realizes that gambling, the issue of gambling, the addiction of gambling is not a personal issue. It's actually a community issue. It affects everyone. Everyone, and even if it doesn't affect you directly, it affects the entire community. And when that affects a community, it affects you. I have some people who are close to me who actually work in the industry, and they've had guns pointed to their face. They've had people, kids in cars outside of this establishment. They've seen it. They've seen how, and I don't even know if any of my colleagues have ever seen it, but if you pass by any of these gaming establishments, you see how busy they are in the first week of the month. And I mean, it's hard to pinpoint why, but it's almost very obvious to know that maybe some of these people are using some of their special assistance that they get from the government to support this gambling addiction. Maybe. How else? Why else? I'm trying to figure out other reasons why the first week of the month it would always be the busiest time at any of these gaming industries. I don't know. Maybe they're using something else. But when you involve the kids and you start leaving them outside, you know, maybe it's a bigger issue than just what's going on at the carnival. But like the previous speaker said, it's all connected. Even if you take away this, it's not going to address the issue of the whole gambling addiction. But it's a start. And that's the way I feel. It's a start. Then we can start working on some other things. But for me, I just feel like if I didn't stand up here and say something about the gambling issue and had maybe the tables turned and maybe the people I was close to lost their lives because they had a gun pointed in their face, then I didn't do my job by standing up here and saying that I don't condone gambling at all, period, because it is a big issue. And although this seems very little, let's not forget that family values and life is a whole lot more important than making an extra dollar. And so I stand in support of this Bill 50. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Muñoz. Senator Estevez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not here today, and I never presume to be the moral authority, or I don't present myself here to make the moral argument. I don't believe that anyone is particularly qualified to make that type of argument on the behalf of everybody. But also understanding that this is not just a simple matter of principle. People are different, with different values, and people are complicated. And in doing the work of the people, we have to understand that. But with this particular issue, I do raise a couple of concerns with what has been going on and the potential of this bill to address that. I have to admit, maybe I didn't mind when it was in some corner and it really wasn't within eyesight and you don't really see the issues and how it affects people. But now as a public servant, and I think one of the people the previous speaker had mentioned who walk around Paseo with my family, I do notice there are other families out there that's an environment that belongs to the community. Gambling, we know, is restricted to adults. Paseo is not. And when I first saw that building, before I even knew what it was, I thought it was maybe a temporary restroom for the future festivities. And oh, to my surprise, when I found out that it was a casino right in the center of our capital. I'd say the biggest eyesore as we talk about Hagåtña revitalization and all the work put in to revitalizing the capital of the island. If we look at the law alone as it stands and not the reality of the situation, when I look at different policies, I tend to put it through the litmus test, and often I'll change the narrative when I look at principle to see if it still applies. And I ask myself the question, do we just go off off the law when we start looking at morality and we start looking at the value of something? And I proffer this, it's a rhetorical question, but what if, let's say, crystal methamphetamine was no longer illegal under the U.S.? Should we start selling it as a government and promoting its sale in order to raise $1? I think that's an easy answer, as we say no. Because one thing that's a fact is that drugs harm families. Another thing that's a fact is gambling does harm families. We do know, though, people have the right to their individual freedom and to decide what they want to do. And there is a fine line on when government should and should not step in. But as a matter of this, I don't believe is a matter of principle. And I think we owe it that extra diligence to understand when our authority should apply and when it doesn't. It's been said, liberation will happen any other way. I truly believe that. I have full faith and confidence in the ability of our mayors to make it happen. Regardless of whether they want to blame it on us or not, it's their responsibility. And I know they have the ability to make it happen. We have full confidence to pay them what they deserve and to execute. And the people have that expectation. So regardless of the outcome of the bill, the Liberation Carnival will happen. I feel confident in that. I've seen firsthand what gambling addiction does to individuals and their family. I often would joke in my time when I was spent in the States. I really hate to say it, but if you wanted to find a large gathering of Guamanians, when you're not on Guam, if you're not at one of the fiestas, just go to one of the Indian casinos, and you're going to see it. And it's been unfortunate to see that. And that's because when you look at gambling is based on games of chance, games of luck. And it advertises to that very sentiment of hope and superstition and a belief in that. And that's something that we have to acknowledge. And typically those who are least advantaged, who are at the highest risk of losing everything, are those that subscribe to that hope. And statistically will be the ones that go and gamble everything they have away. And I think there might be others here who have wisdom and experience in this who could probably testify to the same. But we do know, just like drugs, that this particular issue does not know socioeconomic backgrounds, that it can affect everybody, and all the secondary and tertiary causes effects that happen because of it. So at this time, when we're talking about the promotion of the Liberation Day Carnival, a family event, logic would conclude that you can't marry the two, that we shouldn't subscribe to the idea that they are tied together. And we have to be able to address that this is a completely separate issue, and we need to give it the respect it's due. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I commend the author for the bill, and I rise in support of Bill 50 as it reads. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Estevez. Madam Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
there are many families that have been anti-gambling on Guam for decades, and alongside Atlas and Casino, other organizations, former senators, and many, many others. Many mothers, wives, daughters have been leaders of these efforts to protect our families and communities from those things that we can control, because God knows there are many things in our community that we cannot control that stress our families and our community. I am proud to support passage of this bill, to support all those past efforts and honor them. The law that created the exception that we are looking at today, this exception, when it was created in the 1980s, was so very clearly limited in scope for a very limited time. And I imagine that they never would have agreed to the scheme that we see today, or that this would become a full-time business with all the markings associated with full-time casinos that they were against. Whether we agree with gambling or not, there seem to be discrepancies regarding the fiscal impact on the mayor's offices, the amount of revenue generated from gambling at the carnival, the amount of taxes that are being collected. According to OPA, is only $32,000 in FY15 for carnival activities, for carnival gaming activities. The operations of the carnival were transferred over to this Guam Liberation Historical Society after 2012. And if you read their booklet that they pass out, they have very good intentions, it looks like, what they were going to use the proceeds for. But as we've heard, their audits for FY15 and FY16 are not yet available. As others have said today, there do need to be checks and balances. We are looking to Revenue Tax to be our enforcement arm here, to look out for the government of Guam's interests. They weren't at the hearing, and I've not seen enough assurance from them that is really taking place. We should know, in order to address the mayor's concerns, we should know exactly how much is going to each village and what is the mechanism that it is getting there. Are these monies being transferred from the nonprofit to the mayors directly, to the mayor's offices, to the municipal planning councils? Those kinds of things, I think it's very, very fair for the public to know, to get answers to the questions that we have asked. We've asked at the public hearing. The media's actually been asking these questions for several years before I was ever elected. They talked about the carnival. They asked for accountability for particularly the gambling activities that are going on there. So I don't think anybody should be surprised that this is the last minute and it's the day before the carnival opens that we're bringing this up. But because I think this is something that's really been coming for a long time, that we've asked for the public has asked for accountability, and the accountability just has not come sufficient to satisfy the concerns. We are using government land, government facilities, utilities. We are encouraging our families and school children to attend these festivities, the carnival, and all the other activities that go on during the carnival, like the Liberation Queen events. Those types of things all take place at that venue. So there is clearly government involvement here and government interest. We are today in the past months spotlighting this debate in front of all our kids, and I just can't help but wonder what do they hear from this debate? Does it look like we condone this message that what an individual wants to do is paramount to what is right for the community? But as the previous speaker said, this is exactly what government does. Government steps in when it believes it needs to regulate. And it doesn't always regulate everything, and this is our job. We decide what the government's going to regulate. And as the previous speaker said, we regulate different things that are going to be harmful. Harm is really the criteria. We regulate toxic waste. We regulate sanitation in restaurants and other places and that are going to affect the public. And we regulate addictive substances. So many communities agree to regulate gambling activities and other addictive activities. When the people of Guam decided against gambling, they did it in the face of the promises, and over the years, the promises of money have become larger and larger, that they still said no. So they chose to build their economy on non-destructive activity. Even if it was harder, took longer, that's what they decided to do. And when previous legislatures allowed this exception to the gambling ban, I cannot imagine that they envisioned it to be surrounded by this questionable non-transparency. And so for that reason, Mr. Speaker, I stand in support of the bill. And it's clear to me today that the questions we have are very, very similar to the concerns for which gambling was banned overall in the first place. And so I stand in support of the bill, and I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice Speaker. Senator Nicholas, you're recognized. Any senator after Senator Nicholas wish to be heard? Senator Nicholas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I kind of wanted to put Bill 50 into a different kind of perspective by talking about what it's specifically striking out in public law. On page 2, line 1, section 6462, authorization for gambling at fairs and possession of gambling devices. Section 64.10 of this title does not apply to any gambling conducted by a person who has been issued a permit by the governor. For concessions operated during a fair or carnival, and Section 6420 of this title does not apply to possession of any temporarily licensed gambling device during any Guam Island Fair, Liberation Day Carnival, or any other fair or carnival for which the governor has issued a proclamation. This section is being stricken from the law. And what that does, Mr. Speaker, is it disallows the governor from being the one to issue the permits for these activities. And I wanted to highlight that, Mr. Speaker, because I feel like in context of the conversation, not just today, but in the media and throughout the weeks while this issue is being debated, the governor is the one that's allowing for these activities to take place. And so I wanted to take a moment to recognize a governor, particularly Governor Felix Camacho, who during his term did not issue these permits. And I wanted to talk about this in the context further of the fact that, when we have laws in the books, it's the role of this body to make the law. It's the role of the administration to enforce it, to interpret it. And if you're going to be taking a section of law and loosely interpreting it in a way where you're going to be not only giving out a casino permit for a carnival, but giving it out for every single village fiesta and running a year-round operation of a Tizan, that's the kind of administration that you're choosing to run, something that is intentionally interpreting the law in order to create that kind of environment. And we have laws in the books that require deposits in the income tax refund trust account, and you're interpreting that law to make your deposits whenever you feel like it, rather than make the deposits as it's so mandated. You're choosing to run your administration in that way, and so forth and so on. When you're choosing to run your administration in a way where you're trying to over-interpret and force the legislature to accept that you want to borrow to pay tax refunds, even though it's been expressly declared by the body that that's not what they're going to do, you're choosing to run your administration that way. And I want to raise all these points, Mr. Speaker, because there's a lot of things that have been talked about over the past several months since the 34th has been sworn in. And we need to understand that as a body, we're going to do everything we can under the law to secure the interests of this community and make sure that we're serving the people of Guam. But we need to be doing that in all of our branches of government. I don't really have too many things to talk about with the judiciary, but there's a lot of things that I really hope that our executive branch could take to heart. If these permits were not issued, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. If they weren't so loosely interpreted in a way where they were issued year-round, we wouldn't have such community outreach. We need to stop figuring out how to get around the law and start honoring the spirit of it. And I just wanted to put that on the record as I voice my support for Bill 50. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Nicholas. Any other senator wish to be heard on the main motion, Bill 50? Any other senator? There being none, the sponsor is welcome to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank my colleagues sincerely. Senator Munia, thank you. Senator Torres, thank you. Senator Esteves, thank you. Senator Talahi, Vice Speaker, thank you. Senator Lee, thank you. Senator St. Nicholas, thank you. Senator Ada, thank you. And I know the big debate stems from something much larger. But thank you for expressing your support for this bill. And we can take this on one bite at a time. This does not have to be the end. And thank you for all of my colleagues, Senator Rodriguez, Senator Castro, Senator Espadon, Senator Morrison, Senator San Augustine, Senator Uggan, for allowing this bill to be heard on the floor. And thank you, members of the committee, for allowing it to be reported out. Thank you for thinking about the social impacts, the degradation of our family, the lives that gambling has already taken. And thank you for putting the people first before the dollar. That's the most important part. That we are telling the people that no amount of money is worth your life, that is worth your welfare. And I'd like to point out something that Senator St. Nicholas has said, or the retiring speaker. He's absolutely right. Governor Camacho did not allow any casinos during his term as governor. So this does not mean that this is the end of our carnival as we were threatened. But I think this is a call for us as a community to come up and find a way how we can pull together to make this successful. I'd also like to thank my co-sponsor, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for standing by this bill and for offering resolve to the amount of appropriations that the Mayor's Council received through this. And thank you for sharing your personal experience, especially during our public hearing, because no one can argue that reality. And I'd also like to thank the media for their investigative journalism, for never taking a side but always producing the facts on this specific issue. I'd like to thank my grandfather who stood by me, giving me his continuous support and guidance and counsel. I know this was a measure that was a concern for him, but thank you for supporting me on this. And also to Dr. Cruz, Mr. Dunca, Jackie Marati,
and members of the community for resounding again saying no to casino gambling. And may we have the grace today and tomorrow as we come to vote, that God may guide us in His wisdom and in our hearts. Thank you very much.
So on the motion to send Bill 50 to the voting file, any objection? Hearing no objection. Thank you very much. Senator Adder, I believe that you have Bill 13 next on the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to accept Bill 13-34 COR as corrected by the prime sponsor and amended by the Committee on Environment, Land, Agriculture, and Procurement Reform.
On the motion to accept the Bill 13 as corrected and amended, any objection? There being none.
So now I'll move to place Bill 13-34 COR into the third reading file, and I would like to discuss it.
Any objection? Hearing none. You're recognized to speak on the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Everybody should have, maybe if you can just take a minute or a 30-second recess here, make sure everybody's got a copy of the aerial photograph. And if it would help, we do have a large graphic back here, and that might help to kind of, if we wanted to use that. Otherwise, we've got the aerial graphics. Unless anybody wants to use the aerial graphics, we can go ahead and, I think, refer to the aerial map that's been passed out. And so let me just give a little bit of background here. First of all, Bill 13 proposes to rezone approximately 250 acres of property from the current zone of agriculture to M1. And in that 250 acres, we're talking at about approximately 40 lots. So all this goes back, first of all, to South Tizon. If you take a look there on your graphics, South Tizon was returned back to the government of Guam in 1996. And it all started with the passage by the U.S. Congress of the Base Realignment Closure Act of 1990. And that set the stage for the return of lands at the Naval Air Station Guam, Agana, to the government of Guam. Prior to the effectuation of the conveyance, the government of Guam had to develop a reuse master plan for the return land. And so on December 1995, 5 years after the passage of the BRAC law, Governor Gutierrez at the time transmitted to the Department of Defense the Naval Air Station Base Reuse Master Plan, which we have since called the Tizon Plan, for approval. The Tizon Plan was developed by the Comitea para Tizon, which was a committee that was commissioned by the Governor of Guam and recognized by the Department of Defense as the local redevelopment authority. In 1996, the federal government approved the Tizon Plan and began the process for the transfer to Gov Guam of parcels 1 and 2 in South Tizon, Barrigada, which, as I said earlier, it's an area of approximately 250 acres, generally bounded. If you take a look at your aerial graph, generally bounded. I'm going to use the graph, the aerial.
Please, there's a microphone there too.
to orient everyone, this here generally is Route 8. This here is the tri-intersection. This is Route 10 going to University of Guam. This here is Route 16. And the post office is located here. The area that we're talking about to be rezoned basically is this area here that is not bounded within, for example, we got the Guahan Academy here. This property here still belongs to the Airport Authority. This here was set aside for humanitarian stuff, and so they put the Salvation Army into here. This here was conveyed under a different conveyance, and this is the recreation facility here. This here is where the old casino is, where we have our carnival in the past. We have the football field, and we have the 2 baseball fields, and we got that old gym down here where the basketball court is. So everything in here that is outside of these bounded areas up to this road here is comprised of about 250 acres. 250 acres, approximately 40 different lots. The access into here right now is this Sherman Drive, which actually goes through private property. And so if these private property owners decided today to close that road, we have no access into here. During the public hearing, the mayor of Barrigada expressed their concern that we're going to have so much activity in here, we better have good access in and out of the area. This here is Mariner Avenue. This is an existing road, and it passes right by Tizan High School. Down here we have those warehouses. So this actually is existing, and the military had actually mapped this out already to connect to Route 16. And on the western side to connect to Route 8. And we've actually sent communications to Department of Public Works asking them to connect Mariner Avenue to Route 16 and to Route 8. We do know that there's already plans to put a traffic light over here at that section. So there's something afoot to open up that access there. The other access into this area is Corsair Avenue, right by the tri-intersection. And again, that's a fully paved road, and they've got some barriers there, but it's no big deal to open it up, and that will be the additional access. That really was the largest concern that was raised by the mayor of Barrigada. She was concerned about the utilities, but their sewer and water, the water problems that DOE had last week was simply because of a well that had broken down, but really had nothing to do with overload or whatever. To the question then of what does so Bill 13-34 proposes to facilitate the development of South Tizan as envisioned in the Tizan Reuse Master Plan. Now, keep in mind, the Department of Defense agreed, or the U.S. decided to return the lands to Gov Guam since 1990. Finally, in 1996, we were able to get approved the master plan, and we had indicated in that master plan that the property will be used for industrial and business activities. Now, in the year 2000, Government of Guam turned around and we returned the lands to the original landowners. When the original landowners got the property, they then, most of them, had to go to probate court in order to settle the distribution. You know, it started out with one landowner. 100 years later, now you got 100 heirs. And that has taken a lot of time. And it takes a lot of resources. And so Bill 13 was introduced to for the government to step forward and help to facilitate the development of that area to this best use and to assist the property owners. So what's going to happen if we don't have Bill 13 is then these landowners, after they get out of probate court, I know, for example, there's one family that's been in probate court for a decade, over a decade. After they finish a probate court, if they're going to develop this property to its best and highest use, they would have to go to the Guam Land Use Commission to get it rezoned. That's going to cost them additional money. My understanding is that it could cost as much as $7,000 to hire the facilitator to take it through the process and get it rezoned. And that also assumes that the Guam Land Use Commission is able to meet quorum. There was a period of time there when it couldn't meet quorum for the longest time. That it could meet quorum. They only meet once a month. You have to take a number, and we'll end up clogging up the Guam Land Use Commission. So, in view of the fact that the rezoning that's being proposed is certainly very consistent with what the Tizen Reuse Master Plan said we were going to use the property for, I think it's very appropriate that we can go ahead and introduce this bill to rezone that property, the 40 lots, en masse. Now, of the 40 lots that's there, there's only 2 lots. About 5% of these lots are currently zoned industrial, and then there's about 9 landowners that are currently initiating actions, either with the legislature or the Guam Land Use Commission to rezone. So how will this rezoning proposal work? Basically what happens is, if the bill gets enacted, the Department of Land Management will have approximately 45 days to send out notices to the landowners, letting them know of the opportunity that's available from Bill 13 to get their property rezoned. The property owners then will have, after that, up to 90 days to step forward and affirm, yes, I want my property rezoned to M1. And if they don't want it rezoned to M1 and keep it as agricultural, that's fine too. And you can, so this is not a prescriptive measure. This is simply saying, here's an opportunity for you to get it rezoned and cut through their chase, and we can get it done. They have 45 days to do that. The owner will have to pay a rezoning fee of approximately $640, and that money that's collected will be deposited into the Department of Land Management Land Survey Revolving Fund. And so how did they come up with $640? Well, Land Management did their calculations of how much time they think would be needed, and that's the figure they came up with. That versus possibly having to go out and spend as much as $7,000. And so that's basically how it will work. Now, there are some amendments that we would need to make, and the co-sponsor of the bill, of course, did point out the fact that we can't control how long the probate court is going to take, and so we probably should make an amendment to, in page 3, subparagraph C there. First of all, the affirmation of rezoning to provide for 180 working days from the enactment of this act, or completion of probate proceedings. So a probate proceeding could probably take, several years after enactment. Then after those proceedings have been completed, then they will have time to step forward within that 180 days to affirm if they want their property rezoned. I can wait until after everyone speaks, or we can go ahead and I could proffer that as an amendment at this time, Mr. Speaker, so that we can get that out of the way. So on line 15, page 3, I would like to amend and change 90 working days to 180 working days.
Okay, on that first amendment to change 90 to 180, any senator wish to be heard on the ADA amendment changing 90 to 180? Any member wish to be heard on the ADA amendment changing 90 to 180? Any objection? Any objection? Thank you. You may continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the second amendment I would like to make, and again, I thank the co-sponsor, Senator Espaldon, for making this recommendation, is on page 3, line 16. That should read, the enactment of this act or completion of probate proceedings, owners of the lots listed. So the whole thing would read then, affirmation of rezoning. Within 180 working days from the enactment of this act or completion of probate proceedings, owners of the lots listed in subsection A or their duly authorized representatives must provide written affirmation. So that's the second amendment, Mr. Speaker.
The second ADA amendment is to add 4 words, or completion of probate proceedings. 5 words. After act, 5 words, or completion of probate proceedings. Any senator wish to be heard on that? Any senator wish to be heard on the second ADA amendment? Any objection to the second ADA amendment? Or completion of probate proceedings? Any objection? If not,
thank you, Mr. Speaker. And so the question then is, so if the person decides that he doesn't want his property rezoned at this time, then of course on page 4, paragraph D, it spells out that fine, if you don't want it rezoned today and you want to do it, next year or down the road, then no problem. You can basically do it by application to the Guam Land Use Commission. On page 3 there in paragraph A, the listing of the lots that would be affected by bill number 13. And there's one more amendment that needs to be made, but I will leave that to the co-sponsor of the bill because he has a better understanding about the issue about duly authorized representatives. But I ask my colleagues to favorably consider this. I know that the Mayor of Barrigada has called up several senators expressing their concern about this, and the concerns that she raised at the time of the public hearing was the issue about access into and out of the area, and that the committee has actually been addressing through communications with the Department of Public Works. It is not a major undertaking. We're talking about probably connecting maybe about 300-400 feet of asphalt from the existing Mariner Avenue out to Route 16. And then Corsair Avenue is really an easy. So that concern really has been duly considered and is underway. So I think By doing this also, what will happen is it would generate more tax revenues for the government, because the tax rate, of course, for an industrial zone property is a bit higher than that is agricultural. And so I ask my colleagues to favorably consider Bill 13. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Adams. On the main motion, do I understand the co-sponsor wishes to be recognized? Okay. Any other Senator? Senator Nicholas, you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'll go ahead and go on the record and say I'm a proponent of development. I think this area is a prime area for us to be able to consider growing in order to be able to not only get various infrastructure in place to help alleviate the traffic congestion in the area, but also to be able to create jobs. I just wanted to pose some questions to the author just to make sure that everything is on the record. The rezoning is a rezoning from agricultural to light industrial. I wanted to ask the author if he's familiar with any current agricultural activity taking place in the area.
There's no agricultural activity in there. We did, one of the requirements is to provide an agricultural impact statement, and that's been included into the committee report, which was obtained from the Department of Agriculture, and that basically that the area is really not suitable for agriculture. If any of the landowners wanted to keep it, to go in there and do agriculture, they would have to do remediation at their own expense, because the property has been remediated up to industrial level. To then be able to go in there and do agriculture is going to take more remediation. That will be at the expense of the owner.
Is that satisfactory, Senator Smith?
Very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the author for the clarification, because basically we have an entire area on this island that is zoned at a classification that is currently unusable. And at this juncture, we can all acknowledge that we either put the landowners through the burden of having to rezone something, because right now they can't use it at all for its zone purpose. So even if they wanted to build a house, they would still need to go in and rezone it as an R1 or R2. If you zone it as a light industrial, you can use it for any purpose up to light industrial, which means that you can go in and you can actually build residential if you so choose. I very much rise in support of this measure. I think it makes perfect sense for us to, at a wholesale basis, recognize that this area is in fact a light industrial area. We're talking about Teton. The entire place was utilized over its history as a light industrial area. Having it currently zoned agricultural is not only impractical for its for that purpose, but it completely ties up the land from being able to be used in what I would render as its highest and best purpose. And in that location, with this zoning, we will empower the private enterprise to be the ones to go ahead and take that particular area up to its next level, hopefully developing it, hopefully creating more jobs, and in so doing, increasing the readiness of the area for us to be able to also put the necessary infrastructure in place. I'm very excited about the prospects of any kind of development on Mariner Avenue. For us to be able to create a bypass from the tri-intersection, which is a regular choke point to anybody who's traveling northbound from there. Anything that we can do to further open up the congestion there is going to be a very big benefit for all of the residents of the island, not just those who live in the area, but also those who live further north. So I think that anything that we can do to further encourage development, further increase the tax base of the area, further bring in the revenue necessary for us to put in the infrastructure and relieve congestion, all of that is plus, plus, plus for me. So I rise in full support of Bill number 13-34, and I encourage my colleagues to do the same. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Nicholas. On the main motion, Senator Castro, Senator Uggan, and Senator Esteves. Senator Uggan, you want to speak? No? Okay. Senator Castro, then Senator Esteves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I certainly could appreciate the author's desire to assist our local families. I too rise in support of the intent of the bill, but I would like to bring it to the body's attention some of the findings, particularly the concerns as evidence in the committee report. As a former member of the MPC, I like to bring it to the front of mind that there are several citations throughout the report from various entities and specific concerns, and maybe the author can address them individually. From GPA, there were concerns about easements. From Guam Waterworks, there were concerns about existing water and sewage infrastructure. It's also stated in the committee report that that infrastructure services the greater Barrigada area. There's also a request perhaps for an area-wide infrastructure survey and study. The Department of Land Management also stipulated that there's an additional need to survey the other parcels. There's also concerns raised, Mr. Speaker, about the potential impact upon the adjacent school or the nearby school. That would be Teadston High. I'd like to see the bill pass, Mr. Speaker, and I just request of the prime sponsor if we would reconsider and maybe send it back to committee, because if we were to act on it during this session, I'd have to vote against it. But I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Did you wish to yield to any of those questions or wish to speak? Senator Adam?
First of all, with regards to the utilities infrastructure that's in the area, there is sewer and water into there. If in fact it's normally at the time when the landowner wants to construct something in there. For example, just last year, there was a piece of property on the south side of the Teadston, just east of or west of Corsair Avenue. It was rezoned legislatively to M1. The owner is actually going to relocate his business, East-West Rental Center, down to this area. If at that time that he applies for the building permit, the utilities find that he's going to need to take additional measures to upgrade, for example, the sewer line or the water lines. At that time, that's when it gets addressed. But to otherwise speculate how large of an activity, it's land management has actually provided. In the committee report, you will find what we call the land zoning consideration report. And in that report from land management, it's basically an expedited review from the various agencies. And nobody really submitted anything significant to suggest that, no, you should not rezone. And I think we should take it separately. One thing is you rezone it, and then if there's concerns about the infrastructure itself, it's addressed at the time when an application is put in for the building permit. If the gentleman feels still uncomfortable, I do not propose that we send it back to committee. And if his level of discomfort does not allow him to vote for it, then that's certainly his prerogative. Thank you.
Senator Castro?
Just for the record, I failed to mention earlier, Mr. Speaker, that my concerns are rested on a resolution proffered and passed by the Municipal Planning Council of Barrigada, dated February 28, 2017, and it's in the committee report. And that's even preceded by a letter from the mayor herself, dated March 2016. I might have got the dates reversed, but nonetheless, it's in the committee report. So they're not just my concerns, Mr. Speaker. You have the MPC and the mayor also raising concerns. And if I can interpret what they wrote, they support the intent of the legislation. It's just some issues that have not been cured in the course of drafting the legislation, and here we are today unresolved in some of those questions.
Thank you. Senator Esteves, you wish to be heard. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm in support of this piece of legislation. I think the intent is great, and I think it really sets a precedent in how we look at growing the economy of the island. Creating a new industrial park, I think, is essential to a growing economy, and I think it's reflective of the time and the growth in Guam's economy. I do have a couple of concerns, though. As a previous speaker had mentioned, with an M1 zone, you can scale down and you can apply other uses to those properties. And I bring this up as a point of concern, and perhaps maybe if we could allow for more discussion. I'd first like to ask the author if he'd be willing to yield to a question. And that question is it his belief that majority of the landowners that he spoke to are in favor of having this converted to an M1? And does he know generally what the prospects for that land use is or are?
Do you yield?
Yes, I yield, Mr. Speaker. Well, for sure, we have not received any objections at the time that we had the public hearing in Barrigada. We did not receive any objections to this. But probably the most important part is that if anybody objects, if any of these landowners object to having the property rezoned to M1, this is not a prescriptive measure. It is up to them to decide whether they want it rezoned. And if they don't, then just leave it alone. And it stays the way it is. And so far as what the prospects are of what's going to happen, well, you know, there's, if you take a look over there, and if you take a look at your map here, right behind the post office there, in that corner, there's already a clearing. That area is being cleared already. There's something that's going to happen in there. I'm not sure what it is. Down just to the west of Corsair Avenue, closest to Route 8, there's already clearing going on down there that's already been rezoned last year to M1. East-West Rental, their operation is moving down into there. Of course, Tizan High School is there. And I believe there's an activity going on over by where the old Revan tax used to be. So, you know, what the owners will want to use it for, I don't know, but it's certainly a perfect area for industrial activities.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I bring this up as a matter of concern, only looking at what has happened in the past. I'm in full support of creating a new industrial area that can be used to help stimulate the economy, but I think doing it appropriately is equally as important. And why I bring this up is when we look at existing areas and how they've come together and deviations from the master plan, and maybe if we were able to address it in this legislation or talk about it, such as if the intention within the master plan is that this becomes a light industrial area, that maybe we'd want to look beyond statute, or notwithstanding that we don't allow for agricultural or housing units. And all you need to do is drive up to where Midpack is and some of those areas and look at the problems they've had in the community. You have warehouses, a factory, they want to do environmental work, a house, a school, bus stops, and a hodgepodge of different zoning activities. And again, while I support the idea and I think it's a perfect location for a new industrial park, I think in planning for the future, we should address, and as difficult as I think maybe making that call is, we should maybe address the fact that we should dedicate this to the purpose of that, and maybe disallow some of those other activities so we don't have another situation that we're having in other places on the island where it's a mix of residential, light industrial, commercial, which makes everything more problematic, not just with infrastructure alone, but with, well, I mean, honestly, we understand all the problems that we get from our constituents with the mixes of these businesses and activities. So I only bring it up as a point of concern. I am not in contention with this bill, and I do support it, but I do I do ask for a short recess so that I may just confirm with the author just for a small moment and see if it's maybe something that we could resolve.
I'll take a short recess. I believe the Vice Speaker's trying to set up for hers. So go ahead. Recess. Legislature back in session. Senator Stavers, you have the floor before we
Thank
vote.
you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the author for taking the time to address some of my concerns. I did just, in fact, receive something from the Municipal Council and the Office of the Barrigada Mayor. I'd like to take a little additional time to review it. Mr. Speaker, there are times when we have to act and we have to act quickly, and I do believe that when there is an opportunity to take a little bit more time on a matter to ensure that we're doing everything we can to make the situation as most amicable to the most amount of people, I'm always for taking that. And so with this recent development, again, with all respect given to the author of the legislation and as much work as they put in, I can attest that I've been looking into this and been interested and spoke with the author early on the onset of its introduction. But with this new development at this time, I'd like to make a motion to send this bill back to committee for further evaluation and to address some of the concerns that were just given to me.
On the motion to send the bill back to committee. There's been an objection. All those in favor of sending the bill back to committee? Motion passes. There was 5 in front and 3 in back. It passed. Senator Addott, you have Bill 34 still? Is it yours? I'm sorry. Senator Lee, you're recognized. Or short recess. Senator Lee, you're recognized.
Sujasmasi, Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the House rules, I move to go back to motions.
Any objection to going back to motions momentarily? Please, you're recognized.
Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the House rules, I move to place resolution number 137-34 LS on the second reading file. Copies will be distributed.
Distribute. The resolution's been distributed. Is there any objection to the resolution's been distributed? Is there any objection to the motion to accept Resolution 137? Do you wish to speak on it? So ordered. So, but you may speak momentarily on it. Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to go to the second reading.
Okay, I place the resolution in second reading for consideration by this body. Any objection? You're recognized.
Sujasmasi, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, this Monday we will celebrate Memorial Day in honor of the men and women who have lost their lives in the service of their country. This annual ritual serves as a powerful reminder of the sacrifice these brave service members and their families have made. And I hope that motivates us to hear and reflect upon their stories. But as we honor these service members and commemorate their sacrifices, I'm reminded of how we have fallen short in our efforts to provide for veterans and military families. Too often, their needs are overlooked. I was raised in a military family. I am a Marine wife. My husband and stepfather are combat veterans. I know many in this chamber are. I know how deeply military sacrifice affects a person. It creates bonds, but also scars for life. War wounds are both physical and psychological, and many veterans need health care for the rest of their lives. The barriers to veterans' health care, however, can be prohibitive. Some veterans may not be able to access clinics due to lack of transportation or simply because they don't know what services are available to them. For families left behind, the pain of losing a loved one will persist for a lifetime. They too often must also struggle for access to support resources. Unfortunately, it seems there are simply not enough resources to adequately care for everyone who needs our help. We are currently struggling to find money just to keep up our local veterans cemetery. We are currently struggling. I was ashamed to see the dilapidated condition of the gravestones and the memorials when I last visited a few weeks ago. We must do better. By honoring our fallen heroes every time we call to session, we are reminding ourselves that the sacrifices of veterans and families of those who lost their must not be taken for granted. When we say the names of the people who have died dutifully serving their country and our island, we are making a promise to those service members and to their families. We are promising not just that we remember, but that we will act when we can, however we can, to create policy that reflects our commitment to them. I want to thank my fellow senators and the many co-sponsors of this resolution. And I want to offer a heartfelt Ndaguna Sujuos Maasi to all our veterans and their families who have sacrificed so much and continue to sacrifice for all of us. You have served us diligently and honorably. I would like to close by reading the words that, if this resolution passes, will open each of our sessions. On behalf of a grateful island and country, we honor you and will mention their name and your family for making the ultimate sacrifice in defense of our island and our country. Sujuos Maasi.
Thank you very much, Senator Lee. On Resolution 137, any senator wish to be heard? Senator Nelson.
I'll be real quick. Just a point of inquiry. This resolution states that we will honor the fallen war heroes of Guam by recognizing the name of a recipient. Is this, how do we determine the fallen members? Are we going by alphabetical order? Are we naming them all in the session, one person at a time every day?
Senator Lee, do you yield?
Yes, I do, and I thank my colleague for her question. So we will simply be recognizing one recipient at each call of the session, and it's the recipient of Miladan Mastakilu na Sakrificio. So we already have a list that we've compiled. It's a list that I believe the speaker is charged with upkeeping, and it's a list of local service members who were killed in the line of duty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to say that I support this bill. I commend the author, I support this resolution. I commend the author for writing it. I'm a little bit disappointed that I didn't think of it first, but this is a very good resolution. Thank you.
Any other senator wish to be heard? Senator Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand in support of this resolution. I think it's going to be a very, very good way to start our sessions and a good way to honor our fallen heroes. I would like to read, with body's indulgence, from an article from former Senator Ben's website. He was the author of the law that created this Imiladan Mastakilu na Sakrificio. It's actually supposed to be, that the names of these people would be posted in our session hall and of course in our Congress building. But of course at that time we were in a temporary building. So they put all the names on this plaque, and I've asked the Sergeant of Arms to bring them in. So the plaque is now here. It used to be in the old session hall, so I'm sure many of you recognize it. And so they did have ceremonies to put their names on. And I very much want to commend the very fond memories of this time. It was really very hard work for the staff of Senator Ben to try to get this list to be as accurate as possible. I think it's still incomplete, but they started with a list of different periods, and they went back, I think, even to the Insular Guard. So even those names are there, and every period of war. And so if I may just read, this was an article he may have written regarding what this was all about. In honor of Guam's fallen soldiers, sailors, corpsmen, and or airmen, Senator Vicente Ben Cabrera Pangilinan introduced Bill 407-30 for the designation of Imiladan Imastakilu na Sakrificio, the medal of the ultimate sacrifice. Members of the 30th Guam Legislature voted in favor of the bill, which was signed into law as Public Law 30-193. In February 2012, Senator Pangilinan and Speaker Judith Wampat called for a working group meeting with representatives from the Guam National Guard, the Veterans Affairs Office, and local veterans organizations. The group discussed the details of the eligibility criteria as well as the need for assistance with gathering the information for the names of our fallen and contact information for their family members. The working group also decided that the design of the medal would involve all students from around the island in grades K through 12. Announcements were sent out to all public and private elementary, middle, and high schools, calling for island-wide student participation. Over 900 artwork entries were received by the Office of Speaker Wampat and were put up for public viewing at the Guam GPO in Tamuning on April 22, 2012. 5 judges, Alan Van Aken, Terry Van Aken, Johnny Atulay Taitano, Bobby Taitano, and Frank Shimizu gathered at GPO and selected the top 3 entries from each division, as well as the winning entry, which was submitted by Angelica Gomez, a 3rd grader from Santa Barbara Catholic School in Dedido. The design elements were later edited by local artist Ron Castro. The Office of Senator Pangilinan, meanwhile, continued to gather information for the names of over 150 service members who were residents of Guam or were stationed on Guam and were killed in action, dating as far back as World War II. The information was submitted to the National Archives and Records Administration, who would later give official confirmation of the names of individuals who were to be honored. Upon receiving the information, the 31st Guam Legislature scheduled a special session for the presentation ceremony of Imilaza ni Mastakilu na Sacrificio. The ceremony took place on Tuesday, August 7, 2012, at the Guam Legislature Session Hall in Agatna. Family members were invited to receive 31 medals, legislative resolutions, Guam flags on behalf of the loved ones whose lives were lost in battle. And at that time, Senator Pangalinan's office continued to receive information from families of other fallen service women, men, and planning had commenced for a second ceremony. And a second ceremony did take place, and I think some of you senators had the honor of being there. The eligibility for those who would be on this, who would be honored in this way, it was for service members stationed in Guam who were killed in action and were members of the Guam National Guard, U.S. Military Reserves, U.S. Armed Forces, the Guam Militia, Guam Insular Force Guard, at the time they were killed in action and were engaged in action against an enemy of the U.S. or an enemy of Guam, military operations involving conflict with an opposing foreign force, serving with friendly foreign forces engaged in an armed conflict against an opposing armed force in which the U.S. is not a belligerent party, or serving in a combat zone as designated by presidential order. And the medals were presented to the surviving spouse or a surviving child in the absence of a surviving spouse, a surviving grandchild in the absence of a surviving child, a surviving parent in the absence of a surviving spouse or child. So I remember very clearly the work that was involved in this, but the great honor too that the staff had in contacting these families and working with them to make sure that the medals were presented to the correct people, that they could be present at the session for these ceremonies, and that those were kind of course sad, but very nice, I think, way to honor those people. I was able to attend a ceremony at the Manila, the former Koban, which is now used by the Vietnam veterans. And they have a very beautiful memorial for the 77 Vietnam veterans that passed away in Vietnam. And they on Veterans Day, read their names out one by one and ring a bell. And I also think that's a very beautiful way to commemorate. And I know we've got many things that have been set up by the Veterans Associations for this weekend, and I look forward to those. But I want to thank the sponsor for this bill, this resolution, and I think it would be great if we could get review the law that underline this medal and see if we can do better than the plaque, or if we are going to just remain with this plaque, but and of course update the list. And I thank all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice Speaker. Any other senator wish to be heard? If not, Senator Espadon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is indeed a very noble gesture that's presented here in this resolution 137 LS. I do have a question, though, to the author, and if she would be willing to
Pose the question and we'll see.
The question is basically I'm not really sure how many names there are, but the way this resolution reads, it says that recognizing the name of a recipient at every session. Is the intention just to name one recipient and just one fallen soldier? Or because in essence, Mr. Speaker, we have 24 sessions over the term of 2 years. And if we're recognizing only one of our fallen soldiers, there are many that are going to be excluded. And so, again, if we're going to honor all of our fallen soldiers equally, then perhaps it should not be just one. Even, maybe might be a more equitable way to honor all of them. But like I said, in the end, we only have, within a 2-year term, in essence, probably 24 sessions, which then means, by logic, that we can only honor 24 of our fallen soldiers. So is that the intent?
Senator Lee, do you yield?
I want to thank my colleague for raising that. It's my hope that we have the support to pass this resolution, and that this can continue in future legislatures. I think it's important that we read one of the names, and we can go in alphabetical order and order as they're listed on the plaque. I also failed to mention that this resolution also instructs the executive director of the legislature to place the plaque conspicuously within the Guam Congress building. And I know that since the move from our old residence back into the Guam Congress building, it hasn't been up. So I think it's important that we are recognizing each of these, each of our fallen service members one by one, and that we also have all of their names on display in the building. Thank you.
The resolution as presented has only one, at least for right now. And if we want to amend it at some future date, and if some of you want to be the committee that finishes the presentation of, there's at least a couple of hundred others that haven't been distributed, that can be done. But this is just a start, and that's the resolution as it's presented.
And I appreciate that. I just, because there are so many families and so many of our own soldiers that have fallen in these conflicts around the world, I just don't want to recognize just a few and have the other families whose members have also been fallen soldiers not be recognized. And so that's why I pose the question. Not that I'm against this resolution, but again, I think when you look at really the totality of the sense of loss that the many families have felt and continue to feel, I just want to make sure that we don't slight those that are not mentioned within the...
I assure you, when we were trying to get the medals out, we went through some of that. This the author's attempt, at least for right now. Let's try it once, and then we'll probably see a fairly major amendment coming soon after this, after the first event.
Okay, and then the other thing is, I know that one of the things that probably is missing in this recognition is to at least inform the family members who, or the family whose family member who has sacrificed, whether there's going to be any notice given to them that on this special session, a special session, that they will at least be able to tune in and be a part of that recognition. And I'm not making an amendment, but it's one of those things that I think might be important, because really if we are going to recognize these fallen soldiers of ours and really help give honor to them and even to the whole family, it seems to me it would make sense that the family should be notified to at least tune in, and if they wanted to record it, they could for their own purposes. But again, that brings, again, some kind of closure, or at least some kind of healing, that this body and the people of Guam recognize the sacrifice that not only the man who, or the service member who went down, but the whole family who made the sacrifice in this endeavor. So, I'll oppose that, and I'm hoping that perhaps somebody will make that amendment to put a notice.
Even if it isn't an amendment, I would think that the sponsor, if the intent is to honor the family, would somehow get a hold of the family. And we'll see how that first one goes next month, if this passes.
Right, and I'm sure the first few will be that way, but as this goes on throughout time, and again, as the author said, she's hoping that this will go on in perpetuity for legislatures to follow, right, that even that practice may not be recognized or remembered, because again, this is a very fluid body. Who knows who's going to be in the next legislature, and again, maybe it should be included in here somewhere, but I'll leave that for the author to amend if she so wills. But thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Senator Ed, I noticed your hand go up.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I certainly rise in support of any measure that would recognize those who have made the ultimate sacrifice. I just have a question of the sponsor, if she would respond. My question is, so on page 2 here, we show that we're adding then to the agenda or to the daily order of business there, recognition of a recipient. Then there was the preceding colleague speaker here asked the question about, so I guess it's one per session. My question then is one, so at next session, which fallen hero is to be recognized? The guy that died back in 1962, or are we just going to pick it at random, or we're going to go alphabetical order, or what? And the second question that I have is, how is this recognition going to be? That we hereby, on behalf of a grateful island and country, we honor, Sergeant, the name of the veteran, and the family of Sergeant that's being recognized. Is that the extent of the recognition that's going to be given, or are we going to say that usually if he was killed in action, there was some citation? In fact, I think when the Miladza was given, there was some citation. So are we going to read that? I'm just kind of curious, or are we going to figure this out on the way as we go along? So one is it a random selection of names? And two, how is his recognition? Just Sergeant John Doe, and that's it, or what?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague for posing the question. It's my understanding that we would have as is noted on page 2, the daily order of business, the call to order, the prayer, and then the recognition. And I think that instead of going in alphabetical order, I think we should go in order of the sacrifice that was given. So we'll go with the oldest or the first, and I think they're listed in chronological order on the plaque, so we can start there. So we'll start with the oldest deceased, and in that order. With regard to the statement to be read, page 4, line 15 to line 18. So on behalf of the Grateful Island, and we would just state their name and recognize their family and their name for making the ultimate sacrifice, and we'll just leave it at that. And if any of my colleagues would like to make an amendment to that, that's their prerogative. Thank you.
Before the beginning of next month's session, I would hope that many of you will get together to determine how this is going to be done if this passes. Please. Any other senator wish to be heard on this proposal? Senator Esteves.
It goes without saying, I rise in support of this proposal, this resolution. I thank the author for bringing it to our attention. Again, I'm remiss, I didn't think about that. And I'm more than pleased that we finally brought the plaque over, and hopefully we find a really good place to put it so that people can see it as they come by. And I just had to go back there. If you were to go back there and look, directly at the center of the emblem, 2 names up, you're going to see on there Sergeant Fernando Barcenas Esteves, my namesake, on there. And so I'm very proud that we're able to do this and recognize. I'll probably be in that committee or in that group, that working group, to figure out how exactly we're going to honor the names, because I'd really like to, be able to give recognition to them one time before I'm out. But again, I'd like to thank the author and all the other co-sponsors and my colleagues for bringing this to our attention, and I think it's a happy day. It's a really, really great day to end this particular session day with something like this. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any other senator wish to be heard? If not, you're invited to close.
Susan Mossy, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my colleagues. As I was putting this together and preparing to introduce, I asked a number of them, as they were coming into the session hall, if they would support this, and without question, without reservation, I have 10 names signed on. I don't know, that might go down in the history books as the record of fastest support of any measure. So I want to thank you so much for your support of this. As a military spouse, as a military family member, I want to thank you for your continued support of our veterans, continued support of their families through this resolution, and in hopes that it'll help to inform and inspire public policy to really make sure that we're taking care of those who fought so hard for our freedom to even be in this hall and to have these conversations and these discussions. So again, I thank you, and I move to place Resolution 137-34 as introduced to the third reading file.
Any objection? Thank you. I believe we've exhausted the agenda. Would 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon be good for everybody? Voting up time? The legislature's in recess until 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon for voting.